Hello, and welcome to Life Rhythms, Tarot, Food, and Spirit. I'm here to do a video response. I believe this is probably the last tarot train tag that Arwen Lynch began, probably in the beginning of 2017. And the person who was charged with this month's tag was Eveline Timeless. And the video response is #tarot highlights. And so this is taken to mean our highlights of 2017. So I've watched many of your offerings, and it's a little overwhelming to think about, like, encapsulating what a year has meant to one on any leg of a journey, and certainly a leg like the exploration of working with the tarot and any other mystical or esoteric limbs that go out from there for any one of us. And for myself, there are several. In fact, I would say that tarot was kind of more of a limb of my own inner journey around, especially this point in my life, my experience of living with what is considered to be a terminal illness. So that has certainly upped my game in what exploring the meaning of life, if you will, is and the things that I choose to work with in that exploration. So, I'll leave it at that because it already says a lot. My year, this year of 2017, has certainly run the gamut of all experience. I began the year with my usual anchor of where might they be now? Yes. Of what had become my usual anchor. I'm working with the Goth deck, and this is my small format deck. And along with that, probably the only other deck I had acquired in quite some time, I think I acquired this late in 2016, was the Hermetic Tarot. So very much in that order of practice. So these two decks were in some way anchoring my practices early in the year, along with Oracle of the Oddities, which is an oracle deck, but I'll probably mash a few things in here, forgive me please. And my constant companion, I have the Mother piece, which has been with me for 19 or 20 so years. Really, I think it came into my possession really right when it first came out. So I think it's been about 19 or 20 years now. So these decks anchored the beginning of my year. And right at the end of February, I found myself back in the hospital with another major surgery, and some things got put to the side for a little while. So I had a bit of a gap there. When I emerged from that, and I actually really couldn't use my hands at all, quite unsettling. But the cards didn't exactly get put to the side. They were with me, but a deck that started to come more into my workings was at that point the Dream Dust Shamanic Tarot, which was gifted to me by a good friend of mine. I've spoken about this before, and the artist herself, Sue Kovacs. And quite a different animal from the other decks that I've mentioned. And certainly one that took me through that part of my journey in a way that was necessary, because it also opened me up to my own creative explorations with drawing and painting, which I had been beginning to explore in 2016, but it was one of the first things, the drawing and painting, that I picked back up as soon as I could somewhat hold something, because writing is my other main outlet, if you will, and I couldn't use the computer. My journal entries, I still wrote every day, but my journal entries are absolutely illegible. It was more just that my brain and hand needed to make that connection. So I would say around March and April, this was the deck that came into circulation with Thoth and the Hermetic Tarot. Rider-Waite-Smith was kind of always there on the sidelines, obviously a very different experience emotionally and philosophically, for me anyway, than these other decks. And also, as I've mentioned before, not a deck that I connected with the imagery so much. So then, as my strength and well-being began to flourish or come back to some degree, and I started to be able to make my journey back to my home in Brooklyn, something widened my lens, and what came across, something widened my lens, and I think that's about when I started to watch some videos of the tarot community here on YouTube. And the first person that I really came across that caught my attention was Rose over at Dance of the Soul Tarot. And one of her monthly wrap-ups had included quite a many deck, but one of them that really piqued my interest was the Ophidia Rosa. And so then that became, then in a way, this is I think my gateway into buying decks, acquiring new decks. And this deck, for many of you who are seeing this, probably are very familiar with this deck, in a way is much more akin to what would be a pip deck, because the minors are not telling you a story in pictures, right? So it is a gorgeous deck to look at, but this was not my skill. So although I sat with the deck quite a bit, I really did not crack this deck open, but I continued to be, pardon me, attracted to this style of deck, really in the Marseille tradition. So I slowly began to, over the rest of this year, acquire a couple other decks in that tradition. So La Cour des Thérapies, which was one that, again, I sat with and worked with in the sense of meditating with the images and just marveling at the beauty and the tactile beauty of these cards, but did not formally do any readings with. This deck actually to me spoke to me very much of, and it came to me at a moment when I was beginning to work very actively with doing some of my ancestral exploration, which got cracked open this year. And this deck spoke to me quite a bit. So when I would do a lot of my personal meditations with my ancestors, I would often choose one of these cards as though a gateway of them speaking to me. So that was one way that I worked with this deck, but certainly not in a way to formally say I was reading this deck. And then another deck in this camp, if you will, was the Tarot of the Master. So I think what I'm kind of getting at here is one of my aspirations for 2018 is that learning to read this style of deck. And that aspiration came to me quite clearly and absolutely before I had come into awareness of Alejandro Jodorowsky. And I don't have his deck right here with me, but I actually got this deck, but didn't realize much about him. I got the deck, his Tarot de Marseille, because again, I've been drawn to this style of deck, even though I'm not reading them yet. And he's a filmmaker, and I knew that about him. And my partner is a filmmaker, and my partner also has an interest in and has had his own practice over time with the cards. So I thought, well, this would be an interesting deck for both of us. And then I started to bring him up in our conversations, and then we began to talk about his films, and then I started to do a little more research on this gentleman and discovered a lot more about him, or am discovering a lot more about him. And here we have the book that I think is going to crack open my reading of these decks, the Tarot de Marseille. And I'm so excited. So this has been these decks have been a part of my journey this year, but really so far just laying the groundwork, leading me to this gentleman, and who knows what other doors will open or understandings, laying the groundwork for what's going to come in 2018. And I'm excited for that, and I know I'm mashing all this up, but there it goes. I tend to do that. But one last deck in this tradition, if you will, is the Pagan Otherworlds, which I was able to get in on the second printing of this. And again, I know that many are familiar with this deck. So I'm really kind of silly with excitement over diving into this. And I think several others have mentioned this as well. So perhaps we can all support one another in exploring. Oh my gosh, look at this tower. These decks and reading in this style. This historical, the beginnings, really, of this tradition. Now, on the other end of all of that, we have another deck that's a little bit more in the Thoth camp that has come to me. So now I'm kind of coming into decks that have come to me in the last 2 quarters of this year. The Ashara Tarot. Which these images are really so, could not be more different, right? But in terms of just stimulating the imagination and the inclusiveness of the astrological elements. My cards are going to end up all over the floor. And let me tell you, that's not fun picking this stuff up when you're leaning over in a wheelchair and rolling over everything. But, you know, I make it work. We all make these things work, right? So this deck, and then just a couple of others that I'll mention, because really the heart of what I want to say about my year of 2017 is about this community, and that in a way it has brought me back into my life, in a way brought an element back into my life and me back into my life in a way that was not happening. I have my relationships with people, but I don't really get out in the world that much due to the circumstances and that I'm in, and I at once rage against technology and a lot of social media stuff, but I am the perfect example or candidate for why it is such a groundbreaking, barrier-breaking tool for people who just, for whatever reason, don't have access to other ways of creating community. And so I feel so enlivened to be a part of this in whatever small way that I am, and some of the people especially that have made me feel very included in this. One would definitely be Lisa, Tarot Alchemist. Another is definitely Simon over at Two Spirit. And then also, and she's probably not even aware of this, but I feel so in her spirit is so great. Jennifer over at Jennifer's Spiritual Garage. She's just always so uplifting to listen to. Her presence, you know, it's like you just want a little sunshine in my day, and then always stimulated intellectually or mentally by what Rose has to offer, and then also recently by the channel Nobody Here, and so just some inspiring people to me. And then not to forget Kasha over at Tarot Map, who created this gorgeous dark goddess wand and that I have in my possession that is just stunning work, and I showed that I think in my November wrap up. So yeah, the cards have been amazing, and the new decks have been amazing, and opening mind and understandings in different ways. But really the people have been the most important part. Gosh, I was thinking about saying other things and being more concise, hoping to be more concise, and I haven't been. So here it is, me and all of my randomness at this moment. I guess I'll kind of wind this up with saying 2 other decks that were in a lot of heavy rotation for me have been Tarot of the Crone. This deck I just have adored working with this deck. Got a lot of heavy use in the Instagram challenge that I did in October, which has been my most successful Instagram challenge, in that I was on top of it and very engaged with it. And for various reasons, November and December have just petered out. It's been more where my energy has been on some projects, other projects that I've been working on. And then, of course, the Marielle Tarot here. Just a stunning, stunning deck. And one not to be taken lightly, for sure. As many of you who work with it, I think, know, right? Just absolutely gorgeous. But this has been all of it. So much nourishment for me. And nourishment has really been my life's work on many different levels, and been my life's work to nourish others. And so now I'm being nourished through a medium and in a way that I was not anticipating. So there are other things I could ramble on about, but I don't think I'm going to. I shared some of the decks, some of my experiences. I'm so looking forward to continuing to be a part of this community, and as we march into 2018 and March with the Pips, I guess. I think there was a March with the Pips challenge last year. I don't know if there'll be one again. I don't know anything about what that challenge was, but I'm imagining it's using this style of deck. You'll be around for that. And until I see you all again, blessings be and be well.